Wonderful. I'm impressed. You all produced beautiful art. How did it feel for you? What are sort of some of the reactions?
I'm way too much of a perfectionist. I like spent more time coming back to the sky every time that we had like a minute because I felt like I didn't know what I was doing at first with watercolors, and then as I got going, I was like, oh, now I understand how much water I have to mix in. But I'm actually impressed. It looks better than anticipated.
Great.
I guess he's a good video teacher.
So it started out at first, I felt very uneasy about the whole thing just because I was worried that I wasn't doing everything correctly, and I was very worried about following his exact instructions. But then as I got the hang of it, I started to kind of like lose track of time and really get into the flow, and then kind of start feeling more comfortable sort of deviating from the video and doing my own thing. So I went through like the artistic process of like loving what I was doing, then hating what I was doing, but then really like getting into it and getting the hang of it. So.
And how do you feel about?
I love it. I want to frame this, and I'm really proud of it. And I'm gonna make it available for sale.
Wonderful. Great.
So I think for me, I was focusing too much on copying exactly what he was doing in the video. And so it didn't turn out that way, obviously, but I think my focus was just too much on that rather than actually just enjoying the process. But I think it turned out okay. I mean, for someone who's not a creative at all, who doesn't consider themselves as creative, I think it turned out pretty good. And it was relaxing, though. I actually did enjoy painting.
Oh, so you did enjoy it.
Yes, I did.
You too?
Yeah, I think we all, like, as a collective, totally zoned out.
Yeah.
And, like, we're just like, look at my strokes. Like, oh, and, like, talking about the colors. And I think that we, like, had a lot more fun kind of just discussing and commenting on each other's paintings.
I think the process for me was definitely, I think I'm more of a visual learner. So when we were watching the video, I had to watch him actually put the paint and finish the clouds, finish the mountains before I actually did it. Because I was looking at, the way he moved his brush, the way he moved his wrist, like we're talking about, like kind of a perfectionist. Like I wanted it to be perfect, but I didn't know like, where do I stop? Like, where is perfect? But it's like, how do I want it? I don't know, I guess like how he has it, but I can't get it like that. So it's kind of just like an internal battle with myself. Like, okay, I like it, but is it how it's supposed to be? Like, will it look right? But like in the end, it all definitely did come together. So yeah, and I love your people, even though you say you're not artistic. It's beautiful. Like your people have hair, her people has shadows, her sky has just immense movement. Like I really like how all of our painting, it just picked up something different from the same video. So it's beautiful.
So that they look similar, but they definitely aren't identical, and they're not identical to what he was painting, right? How many resonate with what Lauren was saying in terms of perfect? They wanted to make it perfect.
I was just focusing on not messing it up and getting the colors right.
I think I spent a lot of time trying to match my colors to like what he was doing rather than just being like, well, this is fine and this satisfies the need that I have. I didn't realize we were all sitting here though that I put my dunes on the wrong side.
It's so interesting to watch. It's like, oh, okay, there's already some kind of license going on, and people are putting things in place in different ways. You're using bolder colors, right? Did you notice that when you were doing that?
I couldn't figure out how to make it we just went with the flow. I think I was really enjoying the process. It was really relaxing for me, so I really just kind of freehand everything and just went with the flow.
That's
So I was definitely aiming for perfection at first, but then after I royally messed up on my horizon, like painting that, I realized that it was nowhere near perfect. And then from there, I got a lot more relaxed and was able to actually enjoy myself when I was sort of like, this isn't going to be perfect, so just go with it. It's kind of interesting.
And the question you raised is, what is perfect?
I guess it's in the eye of the beholder, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean, it's serving its function. It's pretty. So I'm happy.
But there is this oftentimes in the psychology of our understanding of how to do certain things, which is perfect, right? There is something that we think we want to aim towards, and we want to make it exactly something, right? And you were mentioning you didn't even know what that was.
No.
And that was giving you potentially a block, right? And you were sort of trying and trying and trying until you sort of messed up, right? You were saying until you messed up, and that was sort of relaxing.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to understand. It's like once you let go of this perfection need, and you're able to say, you know what, it's going to be what it's going to be. You're going with the flow, you can enjoy it, right? It was enjoyable, you said.
Most
Right?
definitely.
Yeah. And then when you enjoy it, actually it comes together quite nicely.
Yeah.
It's never going to be the same. And it does potentially serve a certain function, and it's something that is engaging, right? You were mentioning that you sort of were in your own world.
Yeah.
And
Time definitely
Yeah,
slipped
time.
away.
Yeah. I feel like now I'm like, okay, I might watch more of his videos and see what happens.
So, I mean, even trying to, I guess, reach my own definition of perfection in the landscapes, I was kind of thinking about just like adding stuff that he didn't have, like some flowers or some more color, or like Shay has, her people have hair, he didn't mention that. Like hers has shadows, like just bringing that extra touch. But like, if what he had was perfect, I don't know, like what do we have? Something that's superior?
Well, and I think these are the mind games we're playing, and I just want to point that out because there is a innate need to compare things that is not necessarily helpful to the creative process. Because especially when you're creating something new, right? You're not recreating something. You're setting a new standard, right? And when you're aware of that, when you give yourself permission to do it, it becomes more enjoyable, easier, right? And you're not trying to compare. Of course, you were watching a video that's giving you instruction, and you're trying to sort of get somewhere similar, right? And you both, all of you, created something that you didn't necessarily anticipate you would be creating, right?
Right.
And so, in a sense, what I'm trying to make sure we understand about this process is that these kind of internal comparisons, they come up all the time, and they can be our worst enemy. And I don't know how many were sort of saying, yeah, it's perfect. Is it good enough? Am I doing it exactly right here? Or were you looking at somebody else's painting in between, right? This is better. Something like that?
Yeah, I think we did a lot of comments. Not necessarily that yours is better, but more like, oh wow, yours looks a lot more like his. Like not necessarily comparing ourselves to one another, but more like comparing the paintings to what he's doing. And I think there's a lot of like, oh, how'd you do that? And I think there's actually a lot of collaboration. So it was like, at first my sky was too dark, and she was like, "Well, just add more water." I was like, "Oh, okay." Like,
so that helped, huh?
Yeah,
that helped. So there is a benefit of being together and looking at this as a collaborative process, right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
We actually worked together to start the sky when we had to draw the straight line across.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, that was one thing that we all kind of pitched in, teamwork there, collaborated with. So
great. And I just that process is important to understand how that can be enjoyable, right? How you liked it, and then you sort of, I think we saw it from the outside. So you got loose, you got into the process, and you were enjoying. And time was flying, right?
Yeah.
And so what happens oftentimes is when you're in the flow, time you lose your concept of time, and you're fully engaged. Your brain is fully engaged. You give yourself permission to not criticize, to not compare. You're sort of with it. And you can potentially learn, see how this or that person might be doing something different. And yeah, with the water here or something like that, it becomes easier, more enjoyable. And you forget time. and you love the process in itself. And then possibly, ideally, the outcome. Most of the time, we don't have that. I don't know how many of you are experiencing that kind of a flow at work, in your schools, or wherever you are. But we're going to get back there with some of the other conversations. It's just to point out that our brain is made for creativity and for innovation. And that typically when we give ourselves permission to do it, we enjoy it. We love it. Time flies, and it's almost the best time you could have, and you feel like, oh, I'm going to show this, I'm going to sell this, or something like that afterwards. Right? But I mean, you're kind of proud in terms of what's coming out of this, and it is because you're fully there. You've given it your expression, right? And much of the current corporate form of innovation and creativity isn't allowing people to get fully engaged. The brain isn't fully there. So this is just a note. And a side note for the overall conversation. And students at home, I think I'd like you to sort of compare your experience with what the students here have shared and how you were feeling throughout the process and how much it was exciting, engaging, elating, and how much it was potentially sort of you were blocking yourself through a kind of mind game that was comparing yourself to a potential perfect, to an ideal that you couldn't clearly specify, and then criticize yourself in a way to not continue. Because I don't know how many of you had this experience. You said you went through the full process, you hated it, right? Who and why sort of does that come up, right? When do you have those blockages? Do you recall a moment where that was occurring for you?
A blockage? I think it was definitely with the sky. I think I went into it and I was like, oh, it's watercolors. Like, this has to be easy. I'm painting a sky. Then again, I haven't painted with watercolors probably since I was 10. And I was like getting really frustrated that I couldn't get it to lighten up. Now it looks like a stormy night, and that's kind of cool. But at the time, I was pretty upset. Yeah, well, relatively upset.
But I think it's important to understand this because you're oftentimes upset about something that you afterwards love, right? You think this is cool, this is different, this is distinct, right? And at the same time, at the process of creation, you're like, oh my God, this sucks, this is horrible, right? And your sort of prefrontal cortex comes in and just gives you evaluations about yourself that aren't necessarily helpful. And when you come back to see it, it's like, oh my God, this is actually quite nice. This gives it a certain touch.
Yeah.
Any of you resonate with that
Most definitely.
criticism? Okay.
I mean, just kind of reiterating what I said before. I felt like I couldn't do anything until I saw exactly how he did it and then the outcome. I needed to see how it was supposed to look and what I was like aiming for. If I didn't see that, then I'd be like just a landscape. Like, what do you mean? So, like aiming for perfection and then defining my own perfection was my blockage. That was my barrier.
Okay. Yeah. And when did that go? When did that go?
After I saw him do it, I was like, okay, you wiggled your wrist. Okay, I'll wiggle my wrist. I was like, okay.
Okay, he was a good teacher in that sense, right?
Teacher.
Because he was giving you permission to just sort of wiggle or do something, right? Is that fair to assume?
Yeah, I was actually shocked at how well or how good he was of a teacher. I was very apprehensive when we were going to an island. I was like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen here. But I feel like we learned something.
Absolutely.
Could I do this again? I don't know. But
For me, not to be too repetitive, but like when I came into like this whole process, I was trying to follow exactly what he was doing, and then I had blockages, especially when he was mixing colors and I couldn't get those colors right. And then finally, when I realized that I'm not gonna get the colors right, and we had a limited amount of time, and I just went with it, is when I was able to like get past that blockage. And then once I abandoned that, and once I abandoned the notion of like, you don't have to do exactly what he does, and he even said it in the video, he was like, don't copy me exactly. It was so freeing in that sense, and that's what helped me move past the blockage.
Wonderful. I think this is really important to understand, because this is maybe something that one can learn from the whole process for any other kind of creative process, that these blockages are in our head, right? And once we can understand them, identify them, we can remove them. He, as a good teacher, knows what's happening because his sort of pathway went the same way. He sort of said, and when he was taught in school, he was aiming for perfect. And it's like, you know what, that doesn't exist, and it's no fun either, right? And another point here is constraints are actually oftentimes your friends. He was saying, okay, we didn't have much time, and we may not have had the same color or something. It's like, okay, well, just go with it. You're going to go with it. Yeah. And the creative process, oftentimes, that's why we say necessity is the mother of invention. It's when you have constraints, and when you're forceful about those constraints and just accept them, because then they remove the need for perfection, whatever perfection there is. And many people, no matter what it is, whether they play an instrument or innovate in whatever sort, they oftentimes aim for some perfect result. And then they never get there. They rarely get there. And some of the most effective ways to learn how to innovate and create is let go and sort of say rapid prototyping. We're not going to aim for perfect. We're going to aim for something that's better than what we had. Right? And this is certainly something that you didn't have before, right? You didn't know how to do it, but you could get there, and you could create it yourself in some way. And I do think this looks quite pretty. We were looking at it at the process, like, wow, this is awesome. You at some point gave yourself permission very quickly. We saw that. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, there are the bold strokes, right? You were sort of hesitant and tepid. It's like, oh my God. It's like, whoa, you were like, she was almost done and you were still fiddling with the sky, right? And you could see that when that sort of permission came in, you could see, okay, now they're just going. I thought because you had sort of switched the sides that you had given it then. Probably you did at that point. It's like,
Oh, I didn't know I did.
so
I
oftentimes
think it
it's
was
subliminal.
more like actually ease of painting was like, well, I'm right-handed, so I'll do it on the right side. And then I looked around, I was like, oh, everyone's doing it on the left side.
But it didn't bother.
No.
You, right? So you had given yourself permission already, and I think we could tell that from watching it and saying, okay, you know what? Yeah.
I think the best part about being creative is there's no rules. So, you know, as long as it's within the, you know, the guidelines of whatever you're creating, I think, you know, the right side is fine.
Yeah.
It works, so.
Well, you can give yourself permission. The more permission you give yourself about the rules, or even like awareness of those constraints, it can help you be more creative, right? And push the boundaries even more.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what we're aiming for in terms of this class, right? Because CEOs, business leaders at this point are thinking within the box most of the time. How do you get them out of that? I think it's pushing those boundaries and having that process in the brain understood.
Absolutely, yeah. And then even as you begin to abandon perfection, and then you start to realize that there are better outcomes even through your mistakes or through the constraints you have. I can't remember who said it, but someone was like, oh, it's a I think you said, you drew a grandfather. And then I was like, yes. But then that gave me the idea that I should draw more like specific relational people. So it kind of, that mistake led to actually more creativity.
Wonderful.
So that was something that was interesting that happened.
And we oftentimes label things as mistake that aren't mistakes. You just put a brush like this, right? And then it can be this or that. And the more we give ourselves permission to reframe a mistake as an opportunity for something else to be built, etc., right? The more we really build our own kind of innovative and creative capacity. And this is what the whole exercise is about. So I thank you for engaging. Any other concluding sort of comments, observations you want to share?
If you don't get the colors perfect, I still think it would turn out beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My takeaway is I'm going to be doing more of these videos, but also just to trust in the process.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like a cliche, but that really, you know, was an example of that.
And once you do this more, you learn it. Yeah, you know how to do it, how the system works, right? There is a system, right? It's not like creativity is anything goes. No. You benefit from constraints. You benefit from a system. You benefit from some rules. And once you know them, then you can play. Right? So have some more fun is, I think, that system, which empowered me when I did this first. Like, oh, you know, it is fun. And I think that's what ideally we get to, is seeing it as an enjoyable process, the creative process, the innovative process overall. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And on to the next one.